Good afternoon. Welcome to Reclaim Your Strength. This is a free masterclass. It's a beginner's guide to safe strength training after menopause. Now, for anyone who's not familiar, my name is Chris. I am a physiotherapist in the UK, and I've developed a particular sort of passion and interest in introducing strength training to anyone later on in life who's never really done it before, never really kind of got into it properly, and who wants to get started because they realise how important it is as they get older. And I have had a bit of a learning curve over the last 5-6 years in terms of anything related to menopause, and I've realised the impact that it has on the symptoms that come with menopause on getting started with any kind of new exercise regime, and how many barriers and challenges it creates. And I want to talk a little bit about that, and recognizing that they are symptoms of menopause, and that the challenges that you might expect to find as you get started, but also ways we can adapt and modify around that. So this talk will be roughly about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes long. This will be recorded, so you're watching this on YouTube Live, so the same YouTube link that you've got to access this talk, you'll be able to come back and rewatch any parts that you want to go over again, or if you do need to get off at any point and there's areas that you feel like you missed, then you'll be able to come back and watch those again. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about, like I say, the impact of muscle strength, why it's so important, some of the things that stop us from actually getting started with it, particularly in relation to menopause. And then I'm going to come on to some practical strategies about how to get going with it, with strength training, how to start, how do we progress, what exercise we might choose, etc. So we'll come on to that into the second half of the talk. And then towards the end of the talk, I'll be open and honest from the start. I'm going to introduce you to the Stronger for Life online course that I have. So for some of you watching, it might be the logical next step that you might want to take if you felt you needed a bit more support in getting going. But for most of you, you won't need it. That this will be enough on its own to get value from, to learn a little bit more and get a bit more clarity on what strength training is and how it can improve your symptoms of menopause, and how you then not necessarily a reason not to start. So you'll get plenty from it, but if you did want to listen on at that point and you felt like you needed a bit more help, then I'll be introducing that towards the end of the talk. I'm going to just introduce a quote that I found in a second, about just trying to set the scene about why menopause is so important, and why it can have such an impact in you, but also the effect it kind of has around you. But before I do, I just wanted to get an idea about who is watching and where you're watching from. I'm always curious. I imagine it's mainly UK based, but if you find the chat feature and just give me a little comment on where you are in the world, and then I'll come back to that after the quote. So let's just make me a little bit smaller for you there. Come on to here. Ooh. So just move me a little bit further. So I'm in the gym car park and I want to cry. I've been trying to enjoy the gym after having always hated it. I'm working with a personal trainer and I can tell he thinks I'm pathetic and moany. I'm in perimenopause. I have tendon pain and I'm exhausted all of the time. It takes every ounce of energy just to walk in the door. Between his dismissive attitude and my own emotional problem relating to exercise and gym, I almost cancelled my membership. So this is one that I found, or a quote I found online in a kind of menopause support group, and really took my attention because it made me really sad to see that this experience is one that people have. And we'll pick some things out there in terms of perimenopause and following menopause, the tendon pain, the exhaustion, not having the energy, and the effect that then has on the motivation to turn up. And this person did turn up. They still turned up despite all that, and that should be celebrated, and that should have been the main focus of the session. The fact they turned up and came anyway, and then they could have adapted the session to make it more of a positive experience. And the problem is there's a lot of people, and like I say, I've only really in the last 5-6 years kind of started to understand it. And you could blame it being a male thing, but also a lot of younger females don't realise the impact it has as well. And there's a lot of people who will treat you exactly the same as everybody else and push at the same rate you might do as someone in their 20s and 30s. And it's not always going to go well by doing that. And that's why I wanted to give you a bit of an idea here, is rather than rely on someone else to be able to push you, is have the knowledge to be able to adapt and modify your own program around how you're feeling at any particular time and around any other kind of conditions that you might have that might be causing a problem. So just welcome to a couple of people. So welcome to Sally, who is watching from Sussex, and then we've got Joe from Hastings. So thanks to you for watching. I'd be interested if anyone else has had any similar experiences to that, so feel free to share that and I'll come back to those later on. And if there's any questions along the way, then please do use that chat feature, and I will probably not answer as we go through, but I'll definitely come back to them at the end and answer any questions that come through. So before we kind of go on to anything in a bit more detail, I just wanted to just highlight the importance of muscle strength and why I think it's so important and something I'm so passionate about. And so as a physiotherapist, I see a lot of people who come and see me with some kind of pain, whether that's joint pain, tendon pain, muscle pain. And there's a lot of research to show that the loss of muscle strength can be associated with more symptomatic, say, arthritis or an arthritic knee joint. If there's less strength in the quads particularly, but in the legs in general, that person is more likely to experience pain than someone who's got stronger muscles in the leg. So there's kind of that link with, and that's the same with tendons. Stronger muscles absorb a lot of the forces and shield the tendon from those forces, so they then tend to be less painful in someone who's got a tendinopathy than someone who hasn't got the muscle strength. So the muscle isn't absorbing the force, so the tendon is exposed to a lot more of it. But then we can come into other areas of health, and a loss of muscle strength has been associated with respiratory disease, cardiac disease, dementia, diabetes. And they tend to be kind of interlinked there. So again, if we can build strength, we can potentially have a positive impact on all of those. Loss of muscle strength tends to be associated with a high risk of falls. And if you're losing muscle strength, there's a good chance you might be losing bone density at the same time. And those falls can result in some fractures. And common ones tend to be wrist fractures. And there is some evidence to say if you're a woman in your 50s and you've had a wrist fracture, then you should almost see that as a warning shot across the bow, because many people then go on to have a hip fracture, or you're more likely, if you've had a wrist fracture in your 50s, to have a hip fracture in the sort of next couple of decades to come. So now is kind of time to take action, because you can improve bone density by doing some of the resistance training, and you can improve your muscle mass at any age. It's not too late to start. But coming back to those hip fractures are the big ones we want to avoid, because there's some research as well that shows that if you are over 60, you have a hip fracture, then 20% of people within a year will enter long-term care and not come back out again. So that's quite a worrying stat. So between all of that, we can see the impact of muscle strength can avoid all the negatives, but we can flip that as well and try and look at it as more of a positive light, is that the increased muscle mass allows you to enjoy life a bit more. So you can continue the sports that you might currently enjoy doing for a lot longer period of time. You can be the grandparent you want to be and really kind of run around with the kids, pick them up for longer. You can get on the bouncy castle or the trampoline with them, and you've got the strength to be able to do those type of activities and be that kind of present grandparent that you want to be. Then we've got things like being able to just go on walks for longer and things along those lines. And a lot of these things are people's social lives as well. So if you start to struggle with not having the strength to do those, you lose. Those activities are the thing that allow you to have that social life. And if you can't do the activities, you often lose a social element with it, and it starts to lead to a bit more social isolation. So again, I don't want to dwell on all for too long, but the impact of muscle strength is massive, and something that it plays more a part in our lives than we realise. The World Health Organization has created some physical activity guidelines. They are split into aerobic guidelines and the muscle strengthening guidelines. So if we look at the aerobic guidelines, just as a kind of reminder for anyone who doesn't know, they are for moderate intensity exercise, we should be doing 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. So that is, you get out of breath, but you could still just about maintain a conversation with someone. Vigorous intensity exercise, because it's harder work, we need to do half the amount. So it's at least 75 minutes per week. So that is, you're so out of breath, you struggle to put a sentence together of more than sort of 3 or 4 words. Then we also then come on to the muscle strengthening side of things. So the World Health Organization suggests we should be doing at least 2 sessions of muscle strengthening per week. And that's for 18 to 65-year-olds. For over 65-year-olds, they actually say we should be doing 3 sessions of muscle strengthening per week. Now, that might be counter to what you might have thought, because a lot of people think that as you get older, you should actually maybe take it a little bit easier, do less of what might be considered a riskier form of exercise, and we should stick to the things that feel safer, like swimming and Pilates, etc. But actually, they recognise that because we're losing muscle strength at a faster rate as we get older, unless we do anything about it, you need to do more to counter that. So rather than 2 sessions a week, ideally we would be looking at 3 sessions a week of muscle strengthening. As I've put there, not meeting guidelines. Not many people are meeting these guidelines at any age. There is some research that shows it's probably somewhere between a quarter to a third of people are actually meeting the guidelines for both the number of minutes aerobic and the muscle strengthening side of things. So that's kind of almost 3/4 of people who aren't meeting it at all. And then interestingly, or worryingly, depending on how you look at it, the demographic that is falling short the most is women between the ages of 40 to 60. And I'm going to go on to some of the reasons that might be of why that demographic is meeting or falling short more than others. So some of this is a bit more relatable to kind of everybody, but I think there is an element of limiting beliefs that we hold that stop us from doing things. And so some of this might be, I'm too old to get started now, I've never done it before, if I didn't do it in my 20s and 30s, then it's probably not something I can pick up now. And we sort of start to tell us this story that gives us permission not to go down the route of trying something that might make us slightly uncomfortable. There might be things of in sort of society that you hear and have the assumption that, say, weightlifting or lifting weights might be dangerous and we need to avoid it. But actually, hopefully I've shown that by avoiding it, it's dangerous in other ways with those medical conditions, etc. And there's quite a nice analogy that I listened to on a Stephen Bartlett podcast, and he talked about a spider on a white bit of paper, and they used a black permanent marker to draw a circle around the spider. And the spider would kind of walk up to the line, stop at the line, turn round, try and find a different route, get back to the line, and then it would feel trapped within this black line on a bit of paper that we know, looking at it from afar, that black line is meaningless. It could walk all over the paper if it wanted to. And sometimes we do that. We create these kind of narratives that create this boundary that we feel. Sometimes it's a boundary to feel like it's a safe space for us, that we feel like if we stay in that, we're going to be safe. And actually, we limit other options available to us. And interestingly, there's a point where the spider, you can see one of the legs almost accidentally step over the line. And then once it did that, it then ignored the line completely and just walked all over the paper. And when it stopped again, they drew another black line around the spider and it completely ignored it and just went on. And sometimes you find that is once you start to kind of explore these boundaries that you've created and you step out of it and you realise nothing bad happened, it starts to make you wonder what else I could do. And an example of that is someone who joined my course, Stronger for Life. Within the course, I suggest that there's a few baseline tests people do at various intervals so they can sort of see the progression they're making. And one of them you might have seen around in the past is it's called the sit-rise test. So you basically start in standing, try and get down to the floor, almost into a cross-legged position, and then back up into standing without using your hands. there's a whole kind of scoring system to that. So if you use your hands, then you lose points, and you can lose a lot more points. So the highest score you can get is 10, and the lowest is 0. And anyway, this lady Mandy, she had seen this test on social media before, and she just never tried it because she just assumed that she couldn't do it. And then when she went through Stronger for Life, and I suggested doing the test, she said she tried it and to see what her score would be, and she shocked herself, and she was able to do it perfectly, and she scored the maximum of 10 points. And then she started to think, well, hold on, if I told myself I couldn't do that and I was perfectly capable of it, what else have I told myself I can't do? And then that kind of really helped her, kind of unlocked the confidence going into lifting weights and doing strength training, because again, a lot of people tell themselves that they can't lift more than a 3 kilogram dumbbell or something along those lines, where actually they forget they pick their grandchildren up. And I think I looked at 2-year-old, the average weight of a 2-year-old is 12 kilograms. So people are doing a lot more than you realize anyway. But when it comes to lifting weights, they hold themselves back because this fear that they might injure themselves, or like I say, this narrative you created that creates this kind of this belief system that stops you from progressing. So often the time we can push out of those. Some of the other things that stop us are these negative experiences. So like that person at the start, she'd had a negative experience with her personal trainer. She had felt dismissed. She felt there was someone to listen to. And whilst, say it was a New Year's resolution to keep going, she might have a bit of short-term enthusiasm at the start. But if that continues to be a negative experience, as soon as that enthusiasm wanes, her motivation to continue going isn't going to be there. And then her memory of that is going to probably stop her wanting to go back. Other negative experiences, if you had an injury, or if you've had a previous injury that's flared up by going to the gym and trying an exercise, again, the desire to go back and do that another time in the future is difficult. And it's easy to tell ourselves, I've tried that in the past, it didn't work for me, I'll rule that out and I'll do something else. So again, someone in their 20s, 30s has less chance to have kind of the life experience to get these negative experiences. The longer we leave it, the more negative experiences there are that we're having to kind of battle in our head before we go back there. Then there's also some of these physical restrictions. So again, whilst age isn't a reason not to start, and age is, we can build strength at any age, we also have to recognize that age can come with other conditions and restrictions that make it harder, such as arthritis or other kind of tendon or muscle problems, or they might have had surgeries in the past, and we have to bear that in mind. So painful knee or back when you're trying to do certain movements, or you might have had a frozen shoulder in the past and never quite regain the full mobility, and then trying to get that into certain positions that you need for certain exercises can be tricky. And that again creates another reason that people talking themselves out of going, and could be another reason that women in 40 to 60 year old camp are the ones that are falling short the most, is if you've got kind of some of these things that have happened in the past. And then it kind of brings us on to menopause. And like I say, this has been my sort of biggest learning curve over the last 5-6 years, since really kind of getting involved with and creating Never Told to Lift. And if we look at some of the things that come here, the biggest one that I found is I just didn't quite have the understanding of how much the fatigue can be an issue with both the desire to go to the gym. So if you're already feeling really fatigued, like that person at the start, getting to the front door of the gym, or I keep mentioning the gym, this can all be done from home as well, but just getting set up and started when you feel drained to begin with can be really difficult. The good news is sometimes strength training can actually improve that fatigue. But yeah, the other thing is then if you don't feel too bad to start with, but you do the workout and then you just feel wiped out for a couple of days afterwards, then that is really hard to get going and keep that motivation to keep turning up. Then we've got tendon pain. So estrogen in the body creates an environment where tendons flourish. So they repair and recover really well. as we lose estrogen, their ability to do that becomes, it's still possible, but it's more difficult. And if we couple that together with the fact that a lot of women experience some unexpected weight gain during menopause, we've now got more weight going through tendons that can't recover as much. And often that weight gain kickstarts this desire to want to lose the weight. So they start doing more cardio-based exercises that might have some impact sort of to those tendons. So we've got more weight going through them, we're doing more on them, and they're in a state where they can't repair or recover as quickly. And it often leads to tendon pain, which then, again, when you've got pain and it gets worse after exercise, the chances of wanting to continue with exercise becomes harder, and you then end up giving up with it and think it's not for me, or I'll stick to other options that don't involve the same level of impact. Other things that can create an issue are things along the lines or related to pelvic organ prolapse and that kind of bladder and bowel control. Again, two things that aren't particularly conducive to wanting to exercise if you've got the fear of any kind of bladder control issues or that heavy dragging feeling from the pelvic organ prolapse. There is some really nice research that showed that women who lifted less than 15 kilograms, so less than 1.5 kilograms, actually experience more symptoms of their pelvic organ prolapse than women who lifted more than 50 kilograms. So again, counter to the common sort of school of thought, you might have thought that lifting heavy would increase the intra-abdominal pressure and therefore be more likely to cause symptoms of that pelvic organ prolapse or increase the kind of the incidence of bladder control issues. So they make sense. I'm going to keep myself safe. I'm going to just lift light weights and I'll have less issues. But like I say, actually, the research is showing that the group of women that were in that camp of less than 15 were actually the ones that suffer from it more. So it shows that the muscle strengthening can create this robust, resilient body, not just in the way you might think of it, but also with those kind of conditions as well. But the fear around it stops us from getting that point. And as a caveat, I wouldn't say you jump straight on and start lifting 50 kilograms without having prepared the body. We still need to progress slowly up to that point. But the thing that you thought might have been a reason not to lift weights is actually something that can improve by lifting weights. Same goes for that fatigue. I've seen multiple people that have thought the fatigue would be their biggest issue, and actually as they got started they had to adapt around it to begin with, but the fatigue improved. Same with the tendon pain. In physio, the biggest thing we do for tendon pain is increase the strength in the muscle that's associated with that tendon so that it can start sharing the load and reduce the stress on the tendon. So all these things can improve. And then the same is true for the last one with hot flashes or hot flushes. If you are regularly getting hot flushes and you're getting kind of hot, just uncomfortable, the thought of going to do exercise when you get hot and sweaty again really isn't appealing at all. So the chances of wanting to go and do exercise becomes a lot less. But again, there's another bit of research that showed that they took women who were experiencing hot flashes and they put them through a 15-week strengthening program. And at the end of the 15 weeks, the frequency of what they considered moderate to intense hot flashes reduced by about 44% at the 15th week compared to the first week. So again, the thing that stopped you might have stopped you from getting started is actually the thing that can improve at the end of it. There's some of the physical reasons why menopause might stop you from meeting those guidelines. There's also some research that showed there's a couple of other things that women in between 40 and 60 reported more of than other sort of demographics. And that is some of the fears around safety. That wasn't necessarily related just to the gym. That was a lot of it going outside and running and doing stuff on the bike, particularly in the winter months. But safety is one that it could be a reason not to start. So again, it's how do you create your environment around that to try and reduce it? You go with other people, or if you go to the gym, that's not so much of a worry because there's people around all the time. Fear of judgment is a big one. And again, not just limited to anyone who might be going through menopause or perimenopause. This is for anyone. But again, often the gym is a place that people worry that you're going to get judged, because particularly if you've never really done anything in the gym and you're a beginner, if you're not confident in the exercises you're doing, you're then more fearful of the judgment of others around you who you consider experts at what they're doing. But often, as hopefully it comes a bit of reassurance, you'll soon realise that actually everyone in the gym is so heavily focused on themselves that they're not paying a blind bit of attention to what anyone else is doing. And then once you start to realise that, it can be quite liberating. And I had a patient myself that in the clinic that spoke to me this week about it, and she said that she was going in and she looked around and realised that everyone was posing in front of the mirror, or not everyone, but quite a few of them, and they weren't taking a blind bit notice to her. And I was often use an analogy where when I took my son to baby sensory type classes when he was a bit younger, I'm not someone who sings or dances, and it's that kind of environment where you're trying to sing along with them and do the actions. In one sense, is my worst nightmare, but the other was I love the time that I had with him there. So it's kind of catch-22. But I was really self-conscious and worried about what people were going to think. And then within sort of towards the end of the first session, I looked around and realised that at no point had any other parent looked up at all and was bothered what I was doing. They were all focused on their own child. And that was then liberating, and I could really kind of engage in those sessions with him. And it's the same as true in the gym. If you don't go to the gym through fear of judgment, I would challenge you to go in and realise that people aren't worried about what you're doing at all. And then other reasons people gave were around this sense of self-sacrifice and guilt. And they spent so long putting towards spending time with the family and doing everything for the family. So there was almost an element of guilt of starting to do something for themselves. And that might be a feeling you have as well. So it's something to sort of think about there. But plenty of reasons why it becomes difficult to get to the gym. With all those different things in mind, the biggest reason I see that people struggle to commit and have a positive experience in the gym is because they haven't found a small enough starting point or small enough step to get started from. So again, someone in their 20s and 30s who hasn't got a lot of the sort of complaints, their body's a lot more sort of adaptable and resilient at that age, they can take these bigger steps like on the left of the screen there. They can take bigger risks, and often they don't have any kind of adverse reaction to that. And a lot of the gym programs that you find online, or the sort of follow me type YouTube workouts that you work on, they're based on the younger person looking at it that can take these bigger risks. And if you then try and keep up with those and try and take those big jumps in progression or big step to get started, but then it's equally each progression is a big step, at some point the chances are you're going to have a negative experience and then fall out of love with the gym and not want to go again. So if that has happened to you, a lot of the time is we can make these steps a lot smaller. And if you look, they get to the same point. The destination is the same, the goal is the same, but we're taking very small steps along the way, and it might take us a lot longer to get to that point. And we might sort of not run up the stairs like the 20 or 30-year-old. We might want to do small steps of progression, give it time to make sure that it's not going to have an adverse reaction, and then make another small step. There is no rush to get to that point, but it is possible. So it all becomes around how do we adapt and modify exercises and workout programs to make sure we've got to give ourselves the best chance. And that's what we're going to come on to as we go through. So again, if there are any questions around any of that, or if there's anything you think I've missed, if there's any other sort of thing that you feel is related to menopause that you find really challenging when you've tried to get into either resistance training or strength training or any other form of exercise, I'd love to hear that. So again, do put that in the chat or the comments. So if we're talking about how to build muscle strength, we really should understand what muscle strength actually is. So muscle strength is the muscle's ability to produce a peak force. So it often does it maximum force it can produce in a really short quick contraction and then it relaxes again. What it isn't is a small contraction done repeatedly over and over and over again. That's more muscular endurance. So I tend to use a kind of analogy about running. So in running, we've got sprinters who run really fast, or we've got marathon runners who run slow for long periods of time. And any recreational runner, again, you might want to get faster at sprinting, or you might want to get the ability to run longer and do a half marathon or a marathon. If your goal is to run faster and try and beat your, say, 100-meter record, if you only ever run slow for long periods of time, your sprint speed isn't going to change. And that is similar to strength training. If we want to build the muscle strength, we have to push the muscle close to its maximum. Because if we're only working with lighter weights or body weight over and over and over again, and we're nowhere near the maximum force that muscle can produce, we're not going to change the maximum force. And if it's muscle strength we're after, and again, everything I've talked about in terms of the benefits of muscle strength is about that peak force. The maximum force you can produce is the thing that's going to be protective of all those health conditions and the pain and the ability to carry on doing those sports, etc. It's not the muscular endurance. Most people are fine on their endurance side. It's the strength that they're lacking. So if our goal is muscle strength, we need to start pushing the muscles close to the maximum they can do. So we do that by this concept of training to fatigue or training to failure. They're kind of interchangeable terms there. So as an example of that, you might be doing a squat-based exercise. So you might be squatting down to a chair and standing back up again. If you do, say, 15 of those, and I'll talk about why I've said 15 in a second, but if you were to do 15 of those, and the first sort of 10 were fairly easy, a bit challenging, but you can carry on, and then you get to a point where the 14th is tough, the 15th is just about manageable with good form, and you stop there. And if I said to you, could you have done another one, and then you try a 16th, if you get to the point where you struggle to actually get up, you just had nothing left in those, the muscles had nothing left to give, that's where you've trained to fatigue or trained to failure. And that's, you would have got it perfectly. You aim for 15 and you hit fatigue at 15. It's the last 3 or 4 repetitions where the strength is really built. The first 10 were just to get it tired enough to get to that fatigue point. If you finished at 15 and I said, how many more could you have done? And we call these reps in reserve or repetitions in reserve. If you could have done another 5 or 6 fairly easily, and you just stopped at this arbitrary figure of 15, you haven't got close to fatigue or failure. So you've not got towards the top end of what the muscle can do. You're not going to get stronger for it. And whilst I don't think any exercise or movement is a waste of time at all, I think everything has a positive. If your goal was to build strength, you're not going to be building strength. So what a lot of people do in that situation is they would then go, well, I could have done 4 or 5 more. I'm just going to do 4 or 5 more repetitions and I'll hit fatigue closer to 20 or 25 repetitions. And the problem is, once you start going beyond 15 repetitions, you don't build any strength. So we've got these kind of rep ranges or repetition ranges here. So 15 is pretty much the maximum number you can still reach muscular fatigue at and get some level of strength. So any more than that, you don't really get any strength, it's just endurance. But yeah, if you hit fatigue somewhere within 12 to 15 repetitions, you are mainly going to get endurance as a main benefit of doing that exercise at that intensity. But you will get some hypertrophy and some strength. So hypertrophy is the size of muscle, and strength is the force that muscle can produce. And generally they increase fairly similar, but you can get a bit more of one or a bit more of the other depending on these repetition ranges. But yeah, if you hit fatigue at 12 to 15 and you're really hitting fatigue, or you're getting close enough within 1 or 2 repetitions, so if you got to 15 and you could have done 0, 1 or 2 more, that's close enough, you will still get a little bit. But yeah, you'll mainly get endurance, you'll get some hypertrophy, and you'll get a bit of strength. So ideally what we'd do if we got to a point of 15 and we could have done more, rather than do more, we want to actually add a bit of weight or add a bit of resistance that we're working against to try and get it back to 15. And then if we really want to be more efficient with our use of time in the gym, what we want to do is actually build or increase the weight or resistance further to try and get maybe closer to these 8 to 12 repetitions. And that's where we get a lot of hypertrophy with good amount of strength with it and only a bit of endurance. And actually, if you can increase the weight even further and get it closer to kind of 5 or 6 repetitions or less, then you get a lot more strength, some hypertrophy, and a little bit of endurance. So the closer you can get it, or the fewer repetitions it takes you to achieve fatigue, the more strength you'll get from it. But you have to use a higher amount of weight to do that. And if you haven't done strength training before, or there's been a big gap since you last did it, then you find that we risk flaring up an old injury or causing a new complaint or causing the fatigue levels to skyrocket and then find that you're struggling. So 15 is a good starting point, and I'll come on to kind of my normal kind of progression ladder in a second of where you might want to start with that. But yeah, the important bit there is if you want to build strength, we do need to push to fatigue, and we want to push to fatigue within 15 repetitions to really get the strength from the exercise. Because if you're trying to get fatigue at 20 or 25, you're not really going to build any strength. And if you're just stopping at 15 where you could have done another 5, again, you're just stopping at an arbitrary figure without actually having got anywhere near the fatigue point. So again, not getting any stronger. So if you were to take one thing from this session today, this would be the most important bit, is the intensity required to build strength. Because a lot of people have this misconception that working out holding a weight or doing an exercise whilst holding a weight is automatically a strength exercise. And unfortunately, it's not necessarily true. For some people, that weight will be sufficient and it will be the reason they're getting stronger. But for a lot of people, the weight is just too light and they could have done a lot more. And whilst I think Body Pump's great at improving the confidence holding weights and starting to get used to working against resistance, a lot of the time Body Pump tracks are so long that by the time you get to the end of, say, a squat track, you've done about 20, 25 squats. So again, you're not actually getting any stronger as a result of doing it. So sometimes you have to be a little bit more targeted with how you do that. But yeah, example there. So the next bit is we can then actually come on to some of the exercises. So for me, a lot of people start here thinking this is the most important part. I say the intensity is the most important part. Once you've got that, you can actually pick any exercise. I'm going to suggest some of these ones in a second that are the ones I tend to favour, but you could pick the fixed machines in a gym, such as like a leg press or a knee extension or the sort of chest press machine. You could use isolation exercises like bicep curls and things like that. The exercise choice isn't the way. You just want to pick the exercises you're going to pick. Ideally, we're going to cover the majority of the body, and then when you do the exercises, you're going to perform in the intensity we just talked about. I tend to favour these exercises. So these are what we call functional movement patterns, or people often refer to them as compound lifts. So they're exercises that replicate movements that we do on a day-to-day basis. So, and I've got a video in a second where you'll see me doing some of the different options of each of these movement patterns. But you'll see, like a squat, every day we get up and down from the chair, we get up and down from the toilet. And if we can maintain the strength in the muscles to do that, that makes life a lot easier. Hip hinge is a bit like a deadlift if you're familiar with that, and you'll see it in a second. But if you're picking a heavy plant pot off the floor, that often weighs a lot. And if you've never prepared the body for it, doing the gym in a controlled environment, there's a risk that you might tweak your back. And I saw someone literally yesterday for that exact reason. They lifted a plant pot and carried it. So if you're building these muscles in the gym or these movement patterns in the gym, it's easier to visualize how it's going to benefit you in day-to-day life. And that can mean it's a bit more motivating to do them in the gym when, and let's face it, if you'd not started strength training before this, it's probably because it doesn't really interest you, because it's not the thing that excites you. It's the thing you just know that you benefit from doing. So the more you can see how it might benefit your life outside the gym, the more inspiring it is going to be to do them. The other reason I like these movement patterns is because they use multiple muscle groups at the same time to achieve that movement. So you're killing 2 or 3 birds with one stone by working them. So, for example, with a squat, you're using your quads and your glutes together to create that movement. Whereas if you just did a seated knee extension where you're kicking the leg forwards against a pad, you're just working the quads. So now we need another exercise to target the glutes. And so if you go down the route of more isolation exercises, you tend to need a lot more exercises to cover the whole body. Whereas if you cover these movement patterns, you will cover a lot more muscle groups within that workout that you're doing. So I'll just show you some of the variations that I like to kind of include in some of these. So this is kind of example of squat. So initially we might have a box or a chair behind us. So we've got the safety net that you can fall back into if you need to. You can change the height of that. The higher it is, the easier it is. The lower, the harder. We could take that box away and go into a much deeper movement. And it's a lot easier with the dumbbells by your side because you can then do these from home quite easily. But your grip strength might be a limiting factor later on. So a progression is we might go to a bar across your back because you can support more weight across your back without worrying about if your grip strength is going to fail, and then we can go into to really challenge the legs. This is a form of hip hinge. So you're hinging at the hips and then driving forwards to extend the hips. So that's the easier option of a bridge. Then we come on to the sort of deadlift type motion. So this one's a Romanian deadlift. So you'll see from the side in a second that I am just bending at the hips. My knees aren't really bending much. And all the movement is coming from the hips, coming back and forwards. And then the progression of that is what we call a conventional deadlift, where we do it from the floor. And again, you see from the side, there's a little bit more knee bend, but it's still nowhere near what it might be from a squat. So again, this is kind of that heavy plant pot off the floor. And if we practice with a heavier weight, we've really built the strength in those muscles. This is a form of lunge. So this is a split squat. And you can see I've put those blocks behind my knees, so I'm not going down to full depth. If you struggle with knee pain, just doing half the range of motion is absolutely fine. You can still build strength in that range of motion. And then eventually you can explore deeper movements. And then obviously we can progress it by adding more weight to what I'm holding there. Another way of progressing it, I might just add the weight on one side, so it's pulling me down to the one side. So I'm having to use my abdominals to really keep myself upright. As you see there, if I let myself relax, I'm going to fall to the side. Then we've got push-based movement patterns. So we might do something like a chest press there. We could add the rotation if I want to. That requires less shoulder mobility. The shoulder press here, you need the more mobility to get that shoulder right above your head. And whilst I'm standing, I'm going to need a bit more control from my core. So there's ways of making these more challenging or more manageable depending on your ability level. The pull muscle group is a really important one because it's not actually something we do much against resistance anymore. So we lose the strength in that quite quickly. So we can use a resistance band there, or if you're using dumbbells, we're limited by the direction of gravity. So you tend to have to lean forwards in order to be able to achieve that same movement pattern. The other option is using a suspension trainer where we're pulling ourselves up to the handles rather than pulling the handles towards us. This is a form of rotation exercise or anti-rotation exercise. So if I were to relax, my hands would be pulled towards where the band is anchored to. So I'm having to fight the rotation with my abdominal muscles. So they're being challenged there. But if I want to challenge them further, I can use the abdominal muscles to create the rotation. So again, this is a nice one. Again, resistance bands are really affordable and about £5-6 from Amazon, and you can challenge those muscles in various ways. And if I want to make it harder, I can add that diagonal twist down into it as well. And then the last one is carrying. So again, carrying is I see a lot of people who've had an injury from either carrying a suitcase that's too heavy or something related to that. So you can do these variations where you can either have dumbbells in both hands, just one hand. Another nice challenge is having that above your head and then you're carrying the weight in that movement as well. So again, a few different options there. So again, that's just really to show you that within each of those movement patterns, there are then different exercise options that you can include depending on your ability level. And a lot of people think, I've tried a squat before, didn't work for me, caused me knee pain, I'm just going to leave squats out, I'll just do the other ones. And actually it shows that squat is probably the one you need to do more of, because that's the one you're struggling with. So we need some to get the body used to being able to do that. So again, you're not completely limited to those. You might find that actually you feel much more confident doing those on the fixed machines in the gym. So that is a nice option as well. But yeah, hopefully that's given you a few ideas there. So these are the other things that we then have to think about. So in an ideal world, I would say to you, pick your exercises, add a weight, increase that weight to try and get to muscular fatigue. And the thing that is a limiting factor there is your muscle strength. You're limited by the fact the muscles can't do more. So you get to the muscular fatigue point and you do it within the 15 repetitions, so you're going to get stronger. Perfect. We can then start to progress it from there. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So you might find that one of the following happens instead. So as you're doing the exercise, say you're doing the squat, each squat you do, your knee becomes increasingly more painful and you have to stop because of pain. So you stopped at 14 maybe because it became too painful for the knee, not because you reached muscular fatigue or failure. You got nowhere near muscular fatigue or failure. So now you're not actually getting any stronger, despite the fact you stopped within 15 repetitions. And now we're also risking flaring the knee up. So it's going to then make day-to-day life more difficult after this. So we then have to stop, adapt and modify the exercise around that pain. So a bit like you saw with the split squat and also with the squat exercise there, the simple option or the easiest option for most people or most of these movement patterns is to just do a shallow range of motion. And I've done this with lots of people before where you often find there's a threshold angle where the knee becomes painful. So often in the first part, there's no pain at all. And then as you get beyond this particular angle, that's where the knee becomes sore. So what we do is we just stay within the comfortable range of motion, and you can then do that. And actually you can load it a lot heavier in its comfortable range of motion without then having any pain. And then that way you can actually push to fatigue within the comfortable range of motion, build the strength, and then later on we can take the weight off and start to explore deeper ranges of movement without the weight. And you often find you've got your threshold angle has changed and you're now allows you a much deeper movement before you hit that fatigue. So that's the one I would go with to start with. If you have a joint that isn't allowing you to get as deep into the movements as you would like, just start with a shallow range of motion first. We then got confidence is sometimes a thing that stops us from really kind of getting enough out the exercise to get towards the muscle strength and the muscle fatigue. So the confidence is our kind of conscious confidence of it, but a lot of it is subconscious. And an example of that is often I get people to try and do a squat and they can't get very deep, and it's not because of pain, it's because their body stiffens up against them, and it's often through fear of falling or not being able to get back up again. And just simply putting a chair behind someone or one of those boxes behind someone, they automatically can suddenly squat really deep because they know the safety net of the chair is there behind them. If they can't get back up, they just sit down, they can put the weights down to the side, and that often unlocks a lot. So often we can change the environment around us to make it feel safer. And sometimes that's just having someone there. So having someone you go to the gym with and you can spot each other. So we call it spotting, where you're behind someone. If they can't do it, you can help them safely get out of that position. Sometimes there's equipment in the gym that does that for you. Again, sometimes it's a case of that's where the fixed machines are really good, because you don't have to worry about the balance or getting stuck. In the machine, you're sat down, you're safe to begin with. And that can really allow you to get the confidence for the exercises first before you move into the ones I talked about there. Then we've got shortness of breath. A lot of people don't get anywhere near muscular fatigue or failure because they get so out of breath as they're doing it. So in that case, it might be rather than where I suggested you might try and start at 15 repetitions because you need less weight, if you can't get there because of shortness of breath, well, let's just start at 7 or 8 repetitions and see if you can get to there without the shortness of breath being the limiting factor. If you can get there, right, let's see if we can add a little bit of weight. And it might take longer for you to get to the point where you're finding muscular fatigue at 7 or 8 repetitions, but often that is a way of doing it. And you can also make sure you have a longer period of time in between each set that you do. And again, sometimes it's worth explaining that each repetition you do, so each squat you do is a repetition, and you might do 10 repetitions. So the 10 that you do is a set. So you have a set of repetitions. You often need then a break of at least kind of normally a minute, we say, a minute to a minute and a half. And then you can go into another set of 10. That would be 2 sets of 10 repetitions that you did. So yeah, it might be that you just have bigger or longer periods of rest in between those sets to really let the shortness of breath settle again before you start again. Then we've got the fatigue or tiredness that we talked about. So if you find that you are getting so fatigued that you struggle to, you are wiped out for the next couple of days, that's where we might want to start to actually, rather than do, because what I would normally recommend is a workout of 4 to 5 exercises where you do 3 sets of those exercises, and it might take you 30, sometimes 40 minutes to go through those. But if that 30 or 40 minute workout is causing you that fatigue afterwards, then what I do for a lot of people is actually, well, let's just do 1 or 2 exercises for 3 sets. And you might only be in the gym for 10 or 15 minutes. And it might be we just stick more of those. So rather than do 2 workouts a week, you might aim for 4 workouts a week. And for a lot of people, that is something that they can do without having big flare-ups of fatigue afterwards. And then the joint stiffness is another one. Sometimes we have to adjust. So I talked about shoulder not having quite the mobility to come up here. So actually sitting into a bench, and then you can do it at a slightly different angle, can do it. Or it might be instead of a shoulder press or push, you're doing it on your back and you're doing that bench press version. And whilst it's not exactly the same muscle groups, it's pretty much sort of similar muscle groups that we're after there. So it's finding angles and movements that you can do to do that. Again, for the squat, if you can't get your hand or shoulder on the bar behind, then some gyms are lucky you have like these sort of poles that come from the bar here, so you can actually hold them here and keep it stable. Or if they don't have those, you can go on a leg press and you're still achieving a squat-based action, but you're doing it without the need for the arm to be in an awkward angle that you can't manage. So again, a few different ideas of ways you can adapt around things there. Next thing to mention is consistency. So for a muscle to actually become stronger, it takes about 12 weeks of consistent training where every week you're turning up and you're trying to push the muscle to fatigue. After 12 weeks of doing that, your muscle will physiologically change and it becomes stronger. The good news is you don't necessarily have to wait 12 weeks till you start to feel stronger. You often, within a few weeks, you can actually start to feel stronger. And you'll hear from some of the students for the Stronger for Life course shortly that they noticed changes in about 3 or 4 weeks. It's because at the start, we're training your brain to most efficiently use the muscle strength that you've already got. And you often see improvements quite quickly. And then you get to this point that people often refer to as the plateau. And that's where you've maximized the most efficient way of using the strength you've already got. And then you have to wait for the muscles to actually change physiologically. And like I say, that can take 12 weeks. So this isn't something you can kind of turn up, do for 2 or 3 weeks, not do for 5 or 6, and then come back and maybe do another couple of weeks here or there. It is going to take some consistency to do it. And the other level of consistency is it needs to be the same exercises or same movement patterns that you're working week in, week out to see improvements in those movement patterns. Because a mistake I see a lot of people make is they come in the gym, they'll do one workout, or they do it from home, and they'll do the one workout, and they'll come in the next day and want to change everything. And they change all the exercises up to keep things interesting and varied. And the next one, they'll change it all up again. And they might not get back to some of the exercises they did in that first week for another sort of 3 or 4 weeks. So you don't get to kind of see the progression in that time. Now, it might sound boring doing the same workout week in, week out. What I tend to suggest is having 2 alternating workouts that you swap between. So whether you're coming in the gym twice a week or 3 times a week, you just alternate workout A, workout B. Next time you're in, workout A, and then so forth. And it might sound dull, but it's actually quite motivating to be able to see the weight that you're lifting increase and how easy you're finding it compared to, say, 3 or 4 weeks ago on those same movement patterns. So if you never got the chance to do it again for a while, it feels new again and you can't remember what you used. And yeah, it's actually really motivating to see the weights go up in the exercises you're doing. And then what I tend to do is after 12 weeks with my clients in the gym or patients in the gym, I'll tend to mix all the exercises up again and we'll start again and then work on 12 weeks on the new exercises. So you can still add variety in, but it's just not as frequently as a lot of people like to do. And then we've got this here is don't forget to progress, because as things start to feel easy, you start to find that you're now not getting stronger anymore. So say that you successfully got to the point where you were reaching muscular fatigue at 15 with a weight doing a certain exercise, and you worked on that for a few weeks. Whereas at the start, if I'd asked you how many more repetitions you could have done, it probably would have been 0 or 1. What we don't realize is because we're getting stronger and more confident with that exercise, you've got to re-ask yourself that question, how many more could I have done? Because the answer after a few weeks is probably now, I probably could have done 5 or 6 more, but you've still been stopping at 15 with more left in the tank. And if that's a reason, if that's happening, you're not getting any stronger anymore. So we need to keep remembering to ask yourself that question, how many more could I have done? And if the answer is 0, 1 or 2, that's fine. Carry on with the weight you're using. If the answer is 4, 5, 6, you need to start to nudge the weight up to make it harder again. And every time it feels easy, we need to think, it's probably because I'm not working hard enough to get any strength. And it's sometimes hard because we've taken a step out of comfort zone to get started. And a lot of people like to just have taken that step and now that's become a safe feeling and they like to stay in the safe zone. But we need to keep taking those little steps out of our comfort zone. And like I say, it only needs to be a small step. It doesn't need to be those big steps like the 20 or 30-year-olds might take. But my general pattern that I tend to like to work on, because that 12 weeks, there's no rush to get through that kind of 12 weeks where you're trying to really increase the weight. I tend to say, right, let's start. If you've never done the exercises before, don't worry about using weights, or just use very tiny weights to start with and just get confident with those movement patterns that you've chosen first. Make sure there's no adverse reactions with fatigue, pain, etc. If that's gone well, that's given you the green light to say, right, I'm going to add a little bit of weight to that. And at this stage, again, I don't mind if you're not pushing to muscular fatigue yet. Again, add some weight, get confident just holding weight, doing some exercise, and making sure there's no adverse reaction. If that went well, right, let's see if we can nudge that weight up a bit more to try and get close to muscular fatigue at 15 repetitions. Once you've done that, let's see if we can we'll keep it there for a few weeks. And then after a few weeks, let's see if we can nudge that weight back up again. And I wonder if we can do it within 10 to 12 repetitions. And if that goes well, then you're going to go somewhere closer to 6 to 8 repetitions. And then eventually you're going to see if you can get to the 5. And as a bare minimum, I'd say do that over 12 weeks because you want to allow the body plenty of time to adapt as you're going through. But for some people who want to take a bit longer at that confidence building stage, then this process might take 16 weeks. It might take 20 weeks. There isn't a rush to progress as long as you know you do need to progress at some point if strength is your goal at these exercises. So that is kind of my sort of level of progression there that we'd look for. And that kind of brings us to the end of that section of the masterclass. So I'd love to know, what was the most kind of either insightful thing or the biggest thing you learned today from the talk? So if you just use the comments and write that down. And whilst you're doing that, I'll just kind of recap some of the things we talked about there. So we talked about the positive impact of having muscle strength and also the negative impact of losing muscle strength and why it is so important. We talked about the activity guidelines and that we should be doing 2 to 3 sessions 2 to 3 sessions of muscle strengthening per week. But most people are falling short of that, and particularly women between 40 and 60. And then we explored some of the reasons why that might be, some of the limiting beliefs, negative experiences in the past. And then we came on some of the symptoms of menopause and why it makes it so tricky. But we talked about actually the things that are stopping you from getting started can actually improve by actually getting started with strength training. Then we talked on about how do we build strength. So we talked about this concept of pushing to fatigue or training to fatigue and trying to do it within 15 repetitions and eventually getting towards 5. And then we talked about the importance of consistency. It's not going to happen quickly. We need to give this time to work. But there isn't a rush. We can slowly work through. And that's kind of the big sort of part there. So yeah, what we've got there. So Joe says, really good idea to alternate workouts. I hadn't thought about that. And Joe had also said earlier on, I think tiredness is the main thing for me, but when I get into the gym, I do enjoy it. And yeah, so tiredness can be that kind of thing that stops you going in, and the tiredness afterwards, depending on the intensity you work at, can be really challenging. But if you just slightly tweak the length of the workouts, that can really have a benefit there. And then Sally says, very interesting about the train to fatigue process. Again, it's quite new for people because, again, people don't often like pushing that close to fatigue and failure, because if you're pushing close to fatigue, and failure is that other word, failing at anything isn't a pleasant experience, but often in any sort of part of life or any way we look at it, it lets us know where our limit is to try and be able to push to improve from it. But if we don't know where our failure point is and we always stay safe, you'll find you'll never really improve unless we know we are losing muscle strength. You'll probably find that point is slowly creeping down without us realizing it, till eventually one day it starts affecting some of the sporting activities. And if it reduces a bit more, it starts to affect our day-to-day activities. So yeah, it's a key one to build the strength back in there. Like I said at the start, I was going to go on now and mention a bit about the Stronger for Life course that some of you might be interested in if you were wanting a little bit more support on taking those first steps. So Stronger for Life is an online course, and more importantly, the community that goes along with it, that together kind of helps you plan a strengthening program by giving you the knowledge to know how to adapt and modify and progress things on your own without needing a personal trainer, but knowing you've got my support if you need it to help you along the way. And what I've done is try to split it into sort of 3 phases. So it's a self-paced course. You kind of go through the theory side of things on your own, and then in your own time. And there's a bit of a preparatory phase. So we'll go in a bit more depth about goal planning, which is something I didn't really talk about much today, but it's the goal planning side of things is really important, because if you've created some tangible goals that you want to achieve by not only the ones in the gym that you want to achieve, but by being stronger, what it's going to allow you to do outside the gym, having a goal to measure your progress against, and you can see that endpoint getting closer, is again really inspiring and motivating to want to continue. Whereas if there's kind of nothing you're aiming towards, it becomes harder to get excited the further you get into it. I talked about those baseline tests. So there's various ones you can do, and if you can remeasure them at various points to see them improving, again, it's just more information and a more sort of written down data that shows that you are improving, that makes it more inspiring and motivating to want to continue. And then whilst you're going through the kind of theory learning side of things, there's some routines. There's body weight routine, and there's a resistance band one as an optional one, as a way of getting you to turn up 2 or 3 times a week to start getting into that routine ready for when you've created your program. Then we're going to talk through some of the equipment. So there's a lot of gym equipment you see out there, whether it's in the gym, whether it's a home gym type equipment. And so I'll go through a lot of that and how it might be implemented and used. You don't necessarily need equipment to start with. To start with, it could be bottles of water in a backpack. And if you know how many litres of water it is, you know what the weight is. A litre of water is a kilogram of weight. Bottles of screen wash make a really good weight because they've got a handle. They're 5 litres, so you've got 5 kilograms straight away. You can fit 2 of them nicely in a backpack, which is what I used to do in lockdown. And I've got 10 kilograms on my back straight away with another couple that I can hold if need be. But at some point, as you progress through, you're probably going to need some equipment at some point. So I introduce you to some of that. We'll go through some more of the important principles like training to the fatigue, reps in reserve, and those type of. There's a few more that are kind of important to learn there. And then I'll talk about that resistance band routine. Then we go into look at those movement patterns in a bit more depth, some of the different variations in there, and then I help you put those together to create those 2 alternating workouts that you might be interested in, or in doing there. Then you get to do the workout you've created for yourself around your own ability levels. And actually to know that you've created it yourself and you did it with the knowledge that you now have is really rewarding when people have said they've gone through it, got to that point. And then I'm going to guide you through documenting your workouts and planning progressions for the future weeks and months to come. So once you join, you'll kind of get to the login page of the course platform that I use to host the course. And once you've logged in there, you get into the dashboard and you'll either click start course or resume course. And the good thing is it's all little bite-sized chunks. And every time you log off and then come back on, it tells you exactly where you got to. And you can come back and watch that, the next video. And you'll get to this point where you'll see there's 7 modules down the side. Each one's got somewhere between 4 to 9 lessons in them. Each video is less than 5 minutes long, other than the equipment one that's closer to 20. But again, they're all little bite-sized chunks that you can watch a few if you want. You can watch a whole module at a time. You can do it in your own pace. There's no rush to get to that point of doing the workouts, but at any point you can kind of come in. I'll talk about these group calls in a second, that you come and ask me any questions along the way. And then as you get onto the lesson, you'll see there's a bit of writing, the video, and there's a few useful links you might do with a couple of calls to action or kind of things you might need to implement in there. So with the course, you're going to get lifetime access to the course. So there's no, you have to do it within a certain time frame. You can take as long as you need. You'll never get kicked off the course. And if there's any updates along the way, you will have access to all those updates. But the thing I think really puts this apart from other courses out there is that you'll get the live Q&A sessions with me each week. So at the moment, these are done via group Zoom calls. So you get to come on, ask me any questions that you might have or any difficulties, and together we can troubleshoot, and I can help you with that. But also the other people on the call can help you with it, because if you're struggling with it, someone else has probably struggled with it, and they've tried a solution that I might not have thought of, and they can help you through that. And that's been the great thing about these calls, as I initially thought it was more about people having access to me to ask questions, but actually it's become more about a supportive environment where everyone can encourage each other, support each other, answer each other's questions. And there's people that are turning up 2 years on from having started because they just love being part of that supportive community. So that's kind of the biggest thing you'll kind of get from this, as well as a course. But you'll also get the private group, Facebook group for only members of the course, so current and past members. So again, you'll have access to other people through the Facebook group who maybe not coming to the calls anymore. But again, if you put that same problem out there or question, you'll get a lot more answers that might be able to help you with that. And then there's also a 30-day no questions back, money back guarantee. So, or no questions asked, money back guarantee. So if with the course, the group calls, the Facebook group, you haven't got the confidence to get started, you don't feel you got the value from the course, it just wasn't what you were expecting, then I clearly haven't done my job well enough. And in that situation, I'm more than happy to give you money back, and I won't ask any questions at that point. But hopefully that takes some of the risk out of it if you are sitting on the fence and thinking about joining. Like I say, I am more than happy to give that back if you don't find you've got, or wasn't quite what you were expecting. And then you might see, I've got some branded t-shirts and hoodies and things. And whilst it's an Inevitable to Lift logo, it's a bit of a statement as well. So if you're looking to kind of make that statement in the gym and you fancy one of those, then you do get a bit of a discount on those if you are a member of the course. So that's kind of a little screenshot of the Facebook group. That's one of the group calls where people can join. You don't have to come to every single one. At the moment, they tend to be at 10:30 on a Wednesday. If there's enough people join and there's enough demand, then I'm happy to try and put on an evening one where I can. If you can't make any of the calls at the times they are, then you can always send in questions in advance, and then I will give you a video response with my answer. So there's ways around it if you can't make the calls. So this would usually be £248, but for coming on the masterclass, it's now, I'm offering a £100 discount, so it's £148, and that is for the next 5 days. So the end of Sunday, the 1st of June, the price goes back up again to the 248. And if you were to buy today, I'll also include a complimentary one-to-one call with myself. So if there's any point throughout the process that you want to kind of have a bit more in-depth session with me without everyone else on the call to kind of go through any sticking points, then we can have a one-to-one Zoom call there. So again, that's for anyone who buys today, that call's included. For the next 5 days, the £100 discount applies, and after that it goes back up to the 248. And you can get that by going to www.nevertoooldtolift.com/S4L. So that's a number 4. So that's in Strength for Life. And that will take you to the page there, and you can learn a bit more. For the moment, I just wanted to show you a little video of some of the other people who've been through the course and what they got from it.
Taking anti-inflammatories and paracetamol. The right leg would always have a sensation when I was walking that it was actually going to give way underneath me, but I no longer have those, and I'm just 4 weeks in. I feel stronger, sleeping a lot better than I've ever slept before.
I did my workout on Saturday morning and then spent about sort of 4 or 5 hours in the garden. I would be aware of my back after that time. I'd probably have to do a bit of yoga or something. But back felt absolutely fine. It was really, really good. When I played tennis, my serve's getting better, it's improving, it's getting stronger and faster. And I think that's just due to strength in my arm. That's just all in the first 3 weeks. So really pleased that I can actually see some benefits so quickly, which is great.
I never thought I would go back to the gym, but I am. I'm off to the gym shortly. You can do it from home, you can use a gym. It's so well laid out, it's so easy to follow. The support from you and from the group is amazing. Your questions are answered really quickly. Everyone supports each other and encourages each other.
I've got to say, it's amazing, and it's not too long. You can stop, and come in and out. I'm really impressed, and I've done a lot of these sort of things, and really impressed, Chris. It's amazing.
Last week, I think, was the first time I can remember where I really do feel as I went to sleep and was sort of log-like for 8-9 hours, which was just heaven.
One bit that really impressed me was the Zoom calls where you see other people in the same situation doing the same thing, and that's very encouraging. And it also makes you a little bit accountable. You've got to report your progress kind of thing, and you also get excellent advice from Chris, who is a qualified physiotherapist. He doesn't tell you any stuff that is likely to injure you. He's very, very careful to make sure that that's not the case.
I'm hooked. I'm hooked. It's great.
Definitely working for me, and I will continue this.
Thank you so much for your Stronger for Life. It's been amazing.
So yeah, that's just some of the examples there of some of the benefits that they saw from having started strength training, and it's great to see some of the progress they've made there. So just as a reminder, that is some of everything you got there, but that then brings us to the end of the masterclass. I am more than happy to take any questions that you have. So again, last chance sort of to get those in. If you're watching live, you can put those in the chat. If you're watching kind of the replay of this and have any questions, then do leave it in the comments of the YouTube video, or anyone is welcome to send me an email at chris@nevertooldtolift.com. So that's chris@nevertooldtolift.com. And I'll get back to you with any questions, whether it's about the course, whether it's about anything I've gone through in the masterclass. Then, like I say, please do let me know. I'll be sending out an email with a few more details on the course and the offer as well, so you'll find the link in there. I have put the link in the description of the video if you're looking to find that link there. And then whilst I'm just waiting to see if there's any more questions that come through, then I'll just kind of recap there. So if you do join today, you'll get the lifetime access to the course, you'll get access to the weekly Q&A sessions, access to the Facebook group, and then, like I say, for today, you'll get the one-to-one call with myself. If you don't buy today, but you still get before Sunday, at the end of Sunday, you'll get the £100 discount. That does come with a money-back guarantee, so if you haven't found the value, I'll be happy to give you the money back from there. And then you'll also get the discount on any of the t-shirts and hoodies, etc. And that link again is nevertooldtolift.com/S4L. But for now, I think, let me just see. Yep, don't think there's any more questions coming at the moment. Joe says, thanks, Chris, very helpful. No, thank you, Joe, for watching all the way through. And like I say, any questions at any point, please do let me know. But yeah, for now, I will leave you to the rest of your afternoon, and I will hopefully see you soon. Okay, bye.